Okay, hello everybody. Next up we have Tim and Paris, who are producers at Secret Lab, a mobile development studio based in Hobart. Paris actually co-founded the studio, and he has written nearly a dozen books on game design and mobile software development. So please welcome Paris and Tim and their talk, Code the Docs, Interactive Document Environments.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Can everyone? Yep, cool. I'll try and hold this here.
Hi, we're here to talk about interactive code-based documentation environments and all the amazing things that they can do for you. We're going to give you a big high-level overview of them, and hopefully we'll inspire you to go away and look at them some more.
So hi, I'm Tim. I'm the unicorn in this picture.
And I'm Paris. I'm not the unicorn. You can find us on Twitter. Please feel free to tweet us during the presentation. Sometimes we may reply. There are two of us. That is one of the benefits of presenting with somebody else. We're going to tell you a couple of things about us to give you some context for why we're here to talk to you about this specific topic. We think they're important to give you some context so you can understand why we think about this so much. We're horrible academics. We're awfully overqualified and don't do much actual academia, but there you have it.
We're also game developers, so not only overqualified, we're cocky.
That's Josh in the audience, right there with Tim. We're also technical authors, so we write a ridiculous amount of books, so we have to think about how to teach people things.
And on top of that, we do a lot of teaching, both at universities and private programming teaching.
Did we mention we write a whole lot of books?
Like a lot of books.
A truly ridiculous amount of books. We're not really here to talk about our books, though. We're here to tell you what we've been thinking about based on all this stuff we actually do.
So this sort of all came about because we're noticing this sort of situation. So we do a lot of, like I said, programming teaching. We're primarily teachers, I guess, really, is maybe one good way of describing us. And We've been teaching a lot of things that change very quickly. In particular, we've been teaching Apple's new programming language, Swift, and I know that's not Python, but we're not going to focus too much on that here.
You're all very smart people. You'll deal with it.
And we also teach a lot of rapidly changing things like mobile technology, and they change every 6 to 12 months. They're significantly different from what they were from a programming perspective.
So because we teach stuff that changes pretty much constantly, we have to constantly reformulate the material we teach with, and we've been noticing a lot of things that jump out at us about the way people learn programming, especially as we do this. Particularly, we've been thinking about providing a closer linkage between the documentation, the training material, and the actual code or the example material we're trying to teach them. So we've taught classes on Swift, which is Apple's programming language, since it arrived, and we'll cover Swift again a little bit later in the thing. It's about 2 years now. And we've noticed one thing that really jumped out at us about the way people learned Swift was that they really enjoyed one particular facet of Apple's frameworks and languages, which was a thing called Swift Playgrounds, which is a live programming environment or an interactive documentation environment. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this presentation. But Swift Playgrounds is one of the focuses of this presentation. So if you're here for Python, just get out.
Who would he be here for Python at PyCon? So basically, this all came about, again, we're academics, so basically means we stare at people a lot and go, But basically, people mess up. They make mistakes when they're moving between the documentation or sample code and their own code. We sort of notice there's this disconnect.
Especially with new programmers, there's a huge disconnect between what they're seeing and what they're trying to do if they're reading documentation. So they're reading documentation and they have to go back to the code they're writing. They go back and forth. Maybe they're making some notes at the same time. It all gets very confusing, and a lot of them just give up because it's kind of hard to map everything in your head, depending on what type of learner you are when you're trying to learn it like that.
So we sort of started using these things which we're calling interactive documentation environments, which we only just realized recently also is an acronym for IDE, so that's fine, there's no collision there.
This interactive documentation environments term is our term. We don't necessarily think everyone else calls these things that.
But the basic idea is you take sort of, unless you're already a programmer, this looks like relatively boring comment-riddled code, and it turns it into something which is a bit more pretty.
Which, like this. So this is a demo we'll actually run through live with you in a minute. But that was some Swift code and the equivalent playground that shows you all the nice documentation alongside the code. And it's pretty cool. It's fully interactive. It's a real programming language. It's not some made-up programming language like Scratch and so on. Or, well, Scratch is bad, Scratch is great. But it's a real programming language that you can learn, read documentation of, and write your own notes alongside in one place.
So it sort of leads back to this idea of having your codes plus your notes plus your documentation in the one project, the one file. These slides are full of Gaston. We did have a reason for that, but we can't remember what it was because we wrote them a while ago.
So if anyone can figure out why there's Gaston in all these, let us know.
Yeah.
We'd love to know.
But the basic idea is that by putting the code that you're writing alongside the documentation that you're reading to try and understand it, alongside the output of said code, so there's no difference. You're not losing context as you're moving between these different things. You sort of get this situation which is a little bit better.
you end up with something quite useful. People learn what they're doing better, remember it better, and have this one central canonical source of their notes, the thing they learn, and the documentation for it in one place, because they can sort of build upon it as they go.
Yeah, so the more we've explored these sort of interactive documentation environments, the more we thought, hey, these are actually pretty amazing for certain types of teaching and learning and for certain types of actual documentation. So we're going to try and go through what we think is cool about them and hopefully to inspire you all to go forth and do something more useful than us with them.
Right, so there's a bunch of different interactive programming documentation environments out there. That you're probably familiar with many of them. There's Jupyter Notebooks, which was the successor to IPython in many ways. There's the Swift Playgrounds, which you already mentioned, and there's a couple of others. We're only really going to talk about Jupyter Notebooks and Swift Playgrounds because they're the ones we like, and they're really the only truly good ones as far as we can tell. Please prove us wrong. If you have any, tell us at the end. We'd love to learn more about other things. Basically, there's heaps. These are the only good ones.
So there's a few different sort of core features which really make up these different interactive documentation environments.
These
As you
are
can tell, I
features
like saying that.
we've decided make up an interactive documentation environment, just as a heads up. This is not an industry-wide term. This is us making stuff up. So interactive documentation environments feature the ability to live code, pretty formatting, ability to add new notes alongside the live code and pretty formatting, and media rich, so you can add GIFs or GIFs, depending on what you want, videos, etc., 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 and you are using a real programming language, not a special programming language created for the purpose of using this environment.
Before we go on, does anyone actually call them GIFs here? No? Cool. All right. Nope. Sorry, there's just
There's always one.
Yeah, there's always one.
So when you can put your GIFs in these things in your programming a real language. That's basically the features we think make up one of these environments. So we're actually not experts about any of this. This is just something we really like. We like to think about this stuff. We talk about it a lot. It helps with our professional lives and actually our own personal learning.
And basically, the reason we're giving this talk is because we want to share what we've found or what we're thinking about to all of you who are hopefully all experts and are going to take these ideas and run with them and make something better that then we can use in our own stuff. So we're doing it because we're purely selfish.
Exactly. So the first one, which probably many of you are familiar with, is IPython Notebooks. They're kind of deprecated now. They're the original interactive Python coding environment for science and that sort of thing. They had a big focus on academic and scientific documentation.
The thing is, they've actually got pretty good support for a whole bunch of stuff, but they're rarely actually used to teach as such. So rarely would you say give someone an IPython notebook and go, hey, learn from this. It's more like, here's the results of some experimentation we've been doing. Here's the pretty results. Here's how you can see it. You can filter it, change it live, or whatever. And it's actually really good for that, but it's not necessarily great for teaching. And that sort of gets back. So it has just really good support for text, equations, graphs, so on and so forth, all through Python. Python. And it's really good for this, but you can't really use it for teaching because the tool set just isn't designed for it.
Far more interestingly to us is Jupyter Notebooks, which is somewhat the successor, but somewhat not.
So it's a little bit different, but it started quite recently. It's only a few years old now. It supports multiple languages, unlike IPython Notebooks, which just supported Python since the name. When I say that, pretty much all of them are just Python, or pretty much all the examples given online are Python, or are, depending on which sort of domain you're in. Otherwise, it's pretty similar to IPython Notebooks. You have your code, some pretty formatting. You can distribute it. Again, it's primarily used for, I would say, distributing information to people, as opposed to trying to learn from it. Really powerful, really, really cool. It's the underlying infrastructure for something called, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Oriole, I assume is how it's pronounced, which is using Jupyter Notebooks in a way which I think is closer to how these things should be used in the future. And we'll go through it in a little bit later.
But yeah, basically, Project Jupyter is this fabulous environment for all sorts of programming languages that really people only use for Python and R. So the other one we're going to talk about, which is the most dear to our heart because it's the one we've used the most, is Swift.
So we haven't really got time to go through everything. So Swift is one of the things we're going to look at. And more specifically, we're not going to be looking at Swift per se. We're looking at something that comes with Swift, which is Swift Playgrounds.
If it's not obvious by now, this talk is about the idea of interactive documentation environments regardless of the language. It just so happens Swift and Python are the two best examples right now. So if you're not familiar with Swift, Swift is Apple's relatively new programming language. It's open source. It's currently at version 2.3. Version 3 is around the corner in the next month or 3. It's under the Apache 2 license. It's great. It supports Mac OS and Linux currently, and it's being used for all sorts of crazy stuff, and there's a Windows port somewhere.
We're a bit biased, but we like Swift. It actually shares a lot with Python, and I suggest you look at it like Russell said, it's always worth learning a second language. Swift is similar enough to Python that in theory you should be able to pick up the basics and run with it really quickly. But again, if you don't want to, hey, that's your choice.
So Swift playgrounds are the thing we're going to be talking about here.
So they're kind of being open source slowly. Most of it is still closed under Apple's locker of closedness.
But much of it is coming out, and we can expect most of it to be released within a year or two, we think, just based on the trajectory Apple is heading, because almost all of Swift is open source now, and almost all of the stuff that goes around Swift is slowly being open sourced.
But the bit we're going to specifically show off today is Swift Playgrounds, which you can get right now today, even though it's not open. It is free, as in beer, and it's provided you got a Mac. And again, they work pretty much the same as IPython Notebooks. Sorry, Project Jupyter now. It's an interactive coding environment. You write in the code, you get to see the result immediately. It's designed for prototyping, experimentation, and learning, unlike Jupyter Notebooks, which has a bit more of a focus on
science.
Well, I wasn't necessarily going to say science, but presenting information. Something interesting that it does is it supports pagination. So it was designed from the outset to be broken up into sort of a logical structure similar to a book. So you can go, hey, here's page 1, turn page 2, page 3, page 4, so on and so forth. Much like Project Jupyter, it supports Markdown and sort of HTML-ish. I won't get into that there, for pretty formatting.
So this is an example of the Markdown playground, which you kind of saw earlier, but basically you can do pretty much what you'd expect and make things look reasonably pretty. And there's a lot of convenience Markdown, that doesn't actually exist in real Markdown. It lets you do call-outs like tips or warnings or don't do this boxes and things like that. So it's actually very much designed for writing documentation alongside the code.
These tools, both Swift and Project Jupyter, are actually still really quite new. And Markdown isn't the best for a lot of this sort of stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we see better support for different sort of things like restructured text or maybe Sphinx, proper documentation tools integrated in, but that's a guess.
So it's time to be gutsy. We're going to summon the demo gods.
That's Paul Fenwick, not a demo. Well, it might be a demo god.
We're not sure. But we're going to do a live demo. We do have videos prepared in case they don't work. So,
we'll be lucky.
Let's
We're
try
lucky.
this.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do Project Jupyter first.
Yep,
Is that? Yep. So it's working. Yay! Okay, so it hasn't broken so far. So this is a new Jupyter notebook. Specifically, it's a Python Jupyter notebook running on my laptop right now. And let's actually start demoing this. So what I've got here is it's broken up sort of into blocks. I believe the term they use is cells. I never quite remember the correct nomenclature, which are essentially just individual discrete things that you can put information in. So this is a code cell, and I can tell that because it says the word code here.
Hopefully many of you have seen Project Jupyter and other talks. I think there's been a couple that have touched on it.
So I can go
this should be pretty familiar ideally.
If 1 is less than 2, wow, typing one-handed is hard. Print logic checks out, which we hope will work, or else this demo will be terrible. So now if we just want to run this, we can, like so, and look, logic checks out. We're immediately seeing the results. So yay, it didn't break. But this isn't just the really cut down Python. You can actually do anything, and I'm actually going to steal the exact demo from MicroPy, MicroPython, because I thought that was really, really cool. So I'm just going to import math here, and then I'm just going to go math.sign.
I think all our demos are going to take twice as long because Tim's only got one hand.
90, and then again, we'll just run this, and there we go. We're immediately seeing the output of our result there. So, woo, that's great, woo, but, it's not very exciting. Currently, this is no better than just using the terminal. Where this sort of gets a little bit better is, so I can change this next block down here, say into Markdown, and then goes, this is some Markdown.
Do you want me to hold the mic?
Oh yeah, that would be nice. Thank you. So yeah, this is some Markdown here, and to prove it's some Markdown, I'll make that bold like so. And then again, if we run this block, we're seeing it being nice and formatted, and then you can start to see how this would slowly build up. So a example of Project Jupyter. Also, if there's anyone from Project Jupyter here, please tell me why you named it this way. I'm honestly confused by it. And, oops, I didn't actually run that one because it's in code.
Anyway, you get the idea. Basically, we have a documentation environment here that lets us combine markup with code and add our own nodes.
And, I can move things up and down to get it looking the way I want. And then, in theory, you could actually, bundle this up, send it to someone, and they could start using this for actually learning from, which is nothing sort of revolutionary, and it's been something you could always do, but it's starting to be used in more interesting ways. So now I'm going to go to something called Regex Golf here, and this is the Project Oriole, or however you meant to
for
pronounce
context,
it.
this is a thing made by O'Reilly. O'Reilly does publish our books. This has nothing to do with anything we do with O'Reilly. So we're not showing off anything or advertising for them. This is just the best implementation that we've found of actually taking the Project Jupyter technology and using it for a product that involves documentation and code.
So this is essentially trying to teach a bit about Regex and a bit about Python, and it does so with Peter Norvig explaining Regex along the way. So it's taking the joke from XKCD. Hopefully that's visible. Does everyone here know XKCD? I'm making an assumption there, but I think it's a safe one. And the idea is, what's the shortest regex you can make that will correctly identify every winner of the US elections, but no losers? And it's broken up into chunks where we're actually getting text here explaining. I'm not going to risk it on the Wi-Fi, even though it has actually been super solid so far. I'm not going to try playing the video as well, but the video is actually time synced. So depending on where you're scrolling, it'll be playing the appropriate part of the video, which is kind of cool. But again, I'm not going to risk, I'm not going to push the demo gods that far.
If anyone is a demo god, it's probably Peter Norvig, though.
Yeah, that's true. He's actually pretty good. So it's going through here, and we're actually, it's building up in chunks. First of all, we're getting the list of winners and losers of US elections and so on and so forth. I'm just going to scroll right down to the bottom here, because let's just see if it actually works. So I'm going to run this one here. It's going to spin up a Jupyter notebook for us. He says it's going to spin up a Jupyter notebook for us, and
this worked every time while we tested it. But we do have a video if it doesn't work, I think.
Why are you not working? Let's refresh the page.
I did load something. Give us a second. It's much cooler live.
Yeah.
So we'll just try this once more, then we'll play the video if it doesn't work.
But that would be sad.
It would be very sad.
So
You're nearly there, Tim.
Where are we?
Scroll faster.
Scroll faster, Tim. Okay, so we run this here, starting server, spinning up, it's doing stuff, it's going to work. We're going to give it a few seconds. Yeah, come on.
It's not working.
Working. Okay, so it crashed because I didn't run the ones above it, which does make sense. I'm just going to run all the ones above it. We give it a second, and ta-da, there's our regex to correctly identify every single one. And if you're really good at regexes in your head, you can quickly verify that.
Anyone?
No, okay, we'll just assume it working then. The great thing about this is it's live, it's interactive, we can change this. So we gave this talk at Write the Docs, or a variant on this talk at Write the Docs in Portland, and we thought, what the hell, we'll make it funny, we'll add Trump into the list of winners. But that's not funny anymore. So
we're not going to do that this time.
Instead, I'm going to, have I selected all the text correctly there? I'm going to paste in instead the wrong thing, because that's what you always do.
So we've prepared an Australian-specific example for you that doesn't involve anyone having to think about Trump. So we thought that would be preferable.
Boop. Okay, so here we've got now a list of every Prime Minister who's won an election in Australia and every leader of opposition who has lost an election in Australia. And now we can start running this sort of stuff again. We can go down piece by piece. We can see who has both won and lost an election. It's actually really big in Australia, it turns out. So I learned something new. There you go. And now we can see who has just lost an election. And I just realized I should probably actually put in a print here so we can actually see that.
Just deleted the winners as well.
Did I? Whoops. So it's hard to see the screen here.
So we've basically got this great environment where we can do live code alongside documentation. We're kind of missing the ability to add your own notes in this particular implementation, but it's still such a solid actual product implementation of something that you could do with this technology that we felt it was too good not to demo.
And yeah, it turns out there's only 10 people who have ever only just lost an election as a leader of opposition, which I think is good. Probably says something about our political system. Anyway, we could keep going down and showing this. I'm just going to actually comment out one little thing in here that's actually US specific, or rather the history of US president specific. And then if I go right down here again, run again.
And we'll get a new regex, which you can also verify.
And that's our new regex, which again, if you just want to quickly do it in your head, this will correctly identify every Australian Prime Minister who's won an election and not identify any leader of opposition who has lost an election. So obviously this is a slightly weird example, and you'll probably not ever use this for this, but it does really show this sort of this power here where you've got this, you've got full documentation explaining what's going on with code that you can modify and change live how you want, when you want, and you can see the results as you're going through. And it's all sort of broken up. And we even have a video here with an expert explaining what's going on along the side. Now, the next thing we'll do is we'll just quickly sort of show
So I'm going to show you
Swift
Swift
Playgrounds.
now. Swift is the thing we're more experienced with, and Swift Playgrounds is a different approach on the same thing, as we've kind of alluded to.
Okay.
This is a Swift Playground Apple provides to demonstrate the power of playgrounds. It's demonstrating Newton's Cradle, which is the popular executive toy, amongst many other things.
And that's it there. And the entire idea is it's trying to teach you both UIKit, which is Apple's interface framework, and also physics at the same time. And you can actually see we've got this sort of like rich text here that's explaining what's going on and so on and forth. And you can actually sort of turn that off.
So if we go into the menu and turn off the rendering of the markup, you'll see it is actually just
it's just normal
pseudo
markup
markdown plus Swift mixed together. So the thing knows how to render in a pretty fashion. And the fact that like it's showing colors at the top is just the IDE being helpful.
Yeah. The great thing about this is because, again, it's sort of this interactive environment, we can change it. We can sort of figure out what happens if you screw around with physics.
Set the ball swinging first.
Okay, so we'll set the ball swinging.
Tim is making the noise, not the playground.
Yeah. I was actually quite impressed. I didn't think it would work. So let's sort of play around a little bit with this. What happens if, say, we mess with magnitude
So
of gravity?
we're not Newtonologists.
They're called physicists, I think.
Physicists.
Although,
But we're not here to show you physics. We're here to show you the playground. So forgive us if we do something really
let's
stupid.
put that to 50.
Nothing can go wrong.
Dong, 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 dong. And, while that's going, let's change the elasticity to, say, 100. Because if you're going to do something, you may as well do something stupid. And there we go. Woo! And yeah, we're immediately seeing the results of, it turns out if you make things really elastic, they bounce a lot.
But we could go and like copy and paste some of the colors up the top in the array of balls and add more balls.
And we could add more balls and so on and so
and
forth.
And pretty much anything we want to do works. And this is just a reasonably simple Swift file that just happens to
I'm just going to
have this ability to combine code, documentation, and your own notes. So if Tim wanted to go in there and add a comment to himself about something, he could, and it would be persisted there.
Okay, so we don't have to show any of our videos, so we're just going to really quickly skip through all of these slides with videos on them. Yeah, it worked. So something really cool is that this is actually a video. Is that playing?
Play it now.
There we go. Of the playgrounds that are just coming for iPad. They're not actually available yet unless you're a developer, but soon they'll be available on iOS 10, which is a really cool thing, I think, because a lot more people own iPads than laptops or developers, especially with children.
It's a great way to learn code, and this is something that it's deliberately designed for. So playgrounds for Mac on Xcode are designed for actual, work or learning or documentation. Playgrounds on iPad are designed for documentation and kids to learn. So they come with all sorts of cool frameworks and infrastructure to teach kids programming, where there's this beautifully visual world and there's things you can do to make the character move around in the world. The world will appear in a moment, assuming the video actually works. And there we go. And you can give this character commands and slowly learn Swift as it's built up over this, as we said, paginated environment that's running a real programming language that has documentation alongside it and actually knows what it's doing unless you put notes and all sorts of stuff. So here, adding the commands to actually collect the gem, and you can run it, and then the little chap will move forward and collect the gem, and then the next lesson, and so on until you've actually been tricked into learning programming. It's pretty powerful stuff, we think, and we think it's going to be really interesting to see where this sort of stuff goes. We'd love to see it happen with more languages, though.
So yeah, we'll just move on.
So we've shown you a whole bunch of different things. We're going to try and tie it together and hopefully figure out what the point of all of these different things is. So let's look at some strengths.
Okay, so in theory, we've actually had all of this stuff for a while. Like, none of these tools are super new, or the principles of them are not super new, but people are finally starting to do it. But the main strengths is your code and your documentation is literally together. There is no separation between the two. It is the same thing. And also you've got notes written by the person trying to learn what the documentation is telling you written there. So you've got official documentation, your own mad scribblings of, oh my God, this makes no sense, and the code. And you can change things on the fly, like we do with the physics. We went super bouncy. You can do that and you can immediately see the results. And finally, you've also got mixed media, because having a video of an expert alongside going, hey, this is how it is, or even having images of, and it should now look like this. You can go, oh God, mine doesn't look like that.
Or if you're a child learning to program on an iPad in Swift Playgrounds, you can draw something and then shove your drawing of how you figured out how some data structure worked alongside the rest of your notes.
And so on and so forth. So those are the main strengths about it. Primarily, it's this. You can mix notes, code, and documentation.
So that people actually really like this and use this in their learning surprised us when we first started noticing it. We've found people really, really love being able to do this. And we teach a lot of live programming courses, and this is a quote from one of our courses a few months ago where somebody ranted at us at length about how during the course, which is entirely playground-based as we teach them Swift, they really found it handy to be able, and lots of people said this, they found it handy to be able to mix their notes about what they were thinking and how they were learning the topic with the actual examples and notes that we provided them, as well as the tutorial for how things should work. And yeah, we're really aggressive about asking for feedback from our participants, and it usually works, so we get gems like this occasionally.
Again, academics.
Yeah. So there's a couple of weaknesses of the way things work currently, and we haven't got too long left, but we'll quickly dance through these. So really, they only support Markdown, kind of, and HTML, kind of. Most of them support some sort of twisted variant on those, but it's mostly good enough for now. We'd like to see more markups and more different ways to display fancy text. They are kind of crashy. Swift Playgrounds relies on loading like half of LLVM, but it does work, and Jupyter Notebooks is some sort of intricate nest of Byzantine proportions to actually make it run, but once it runs, it kind of works mostly as well. This is why we're really excited for the iPad version of Swift Playgrounds, because you just install an app and then it works. It'll probably still crash though. They obviously have limited language and framework support as well. Playgrounds only works with Swift, probably only will ever work with Swift. As Apple open source more bits of it though, people will surely be able to actually make it work with other languages. And Jupyter Notebooks works with lots of things, but has really only been embraced by the Python and R communities for whatever reason. So we'd like to see more languages do this, because we think it's pretty powerful. One really big negative is none of these hook into documentation tools like Sphinx or whatever, or any of the big documentation systems. So people are writing these glorious, beautiful manuals that don't have any support for anything like this. And we'd like to see more interlinking there between systems to write manuals and documentation, API guidelines and API references, and the actual ways you can learn the language you'll be using those things in. And they only really work for narrative content, so content where you're going from step 1 to step 5 and there's some path in between that you need to learn. It doesn't really work as well in the same way for things like APIs, where you have small discrete things you might want to run. I have seen some API documentation where there's a lot of small examples and you can run them live in the browser, but it's really not the same context, so the tools don't really have the support for that on like a mass scale yet, like Swift Playgrounds and Jupyter Notebooks.
Okay, so what's next with these things, or what do we think is going to be next with these things? So the first one is the clever boffins will actually fix the tech. They're both pretty good, but they are both still pretty crashy at the same time. It'll be easy to add in new language and projects. This is something Project Jupyter seems to be heavily focusing on. It's very good. They're trying to make it so that it isn't just IPython, really. They're trying to make it so it's very easy for other people to add in new support for different stuff, and kudos for them to do so. We think or hope this will replace books. Like, wouldn't it be great if instead of buying a technical book, and I say this as an author, instead of buying a technical book that someone has written, it's a technical book that someone's written where you can actually run the code as you're going through and actually see the results and make changes live then and there. And also articles, so things like Oriole, where I think it's, instead of writing your blog post about, hey, I solved this really weird bug in Django, it'll be, hey, I solved this really weird bug in Django, and see me do it live. We'll get better support for non-narrative documentation. There's no reason you couldn't just embed things like Project Jupyter straight into your API docs for your own frameworks and projects. It's just currently it'll be a bit weird, and you'll have to do a lot of work. I think that will change over time. And you'll get better integration with video and screen sharing. We didn't show it off in Oriole, but it does have that time-synced jumping video thing, which is really cool. But it is, again, it's a little bit buggy because it's YouTube, and YouTube is annoying at the best of times, so I think you'll see better integration with that sort of stuff.
Basically, we have the existing technology to do all of these things, it's just nobody's really using them in this way, and lots of both anecdotal and actual data suggests that people will learn better if they can combine these things, so we should probably be doing it. If you want to actually poke around these things anymore, there's some fairly obvious ways you can do it. If you're on a Mac, download Xcode from the App Store. If you have an App Store account, which if it's an Apple account you do, and that's free, you don't need any other accounts, it'll just work. Then you can play in Playgrounds. Playgrounds will literally be the first button Xcode presents you with when you open it. That's how keen Apple is about these things at the moment. If you've got an iPad, you can install one of the public betas or betas of iOS 10 and play with Playgrounds on iPad right now, or you can wait 4 to 8 weeks, depending on when Apple does something, and everyone will be able to get it. It's pretty cool. If you're on something else or don't want to play with Swift, download Jupyter Notebooks. It is complicated and reasonably poorly documented to set it up. Last time we said Project Jupyter was poorly documented, it turns out the person who wrote most of the docs was in the audience. Hope that hasn't happened again. Truly an astounding effort because the documentation is mammoth, but it needs to be easier to set up, and that's not necessarily your fault as a documentarian. You can also go to try.jupyter.org and try it online, which mostly works and is pretty fun and doesn't require you actually having to do anything. O'Reilly's Oriole is a really cool thing to look at as well. You can check out the thing we played with there, as well as an article on why they did this, which mostly matches up with our philosophy on why we think people should be doing this for their documentation. So maybe check that out. That's pretty much everything. So we're about half an hour in now. I think there's maybe 10 minutes till the next session. If you have any questions, we've got time, I think. Otherwise, you can find us on Twitter. In this one, Tim is the horse again, and I am not the horse again. We'll put slides and notes online on our various websites later. And there's also an earlier version, which is not quite the same talk on that YouTube URL, which we'll tweet after this with the PyCon EU tag as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tim and Paris. Any questions?
Hit me.
No questions?
Okay, if you want to.
Yeah?
Hi, thanks so much for that. You just mentioned something about the Swift playgrounds on the iOS platform, and you said wait for it, so it's still experimental, is that right?
It's currently available in the public beta of iOS 10, so if you Google for iOS 10 public beta, there's a page on Apple's website where you can sign up for that and get it straight away. There's no approval process. So if you want to run a potentially buggy OS on your iPad, you can use it right now. But if you wait 4 to 8 weeks, that's Apple's traditional release timeframe in September or October for a new version of iOS. And there is a new version of iOS currently being tested, so we can assume it will come out then if you want the stable public version.
Thank you.
No worries.
Yep. Anyone else?
Go back then.
How useful do you think it would be for onboarding experienced programmers into companies where you need a lot of domain knowledge that you wouldn't necessarily have?
I think that would be amazing. One of the companies I used to work for, we used to do simulations as part of the interview process where we'd give them a task and ask them to build something through like a day or two and pay them for the privilege. So one of the big problems we had was getting them up to speed on the APIs that we would have liked them to use. And I think something like this where they could step through a series of examples and run them with documentation would be a really good way of bringing people up to speed with something. So yes, that would be great.
Thanks.
Please do that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yep.
Are there any sort of clever and elegant ways to put the data inside the Swift playgrounds or inside the Jupyter notebooks so that you can just have really one file that you're trying to distribute around?
So you can hide, there's a markup. I remember I said it's kind of markdown, but not. There are some markdown-ish tags you can use in at least the Swift playgrounds one that will let you glob in a whole bunch of library code that's not visible in the rendered version. So you can ship this beautiful looking thing that has all your horrible secrets hidden at the top or at the bottom, so you can then run you can do the same Jupyter. Okay, so like the little alien dude running around in the iPad version, that has a whole bunch of, basically it's got a game engine sitting under there that you can't see, that if you copied those files onto a Mac and looked at the unrendered markup, you would see several thousand lines of a game engine to render the world and then only the bits needed to make the thing move around in the world. So yes, you can do that. And you can ship library files alongside individual files and then load them in.
Yep. Anyone else? Nope. Okay. Well, that concludes. One more thing, guys. On behalf of PyCon Australia, I'd like to present you a small gift for your time. Round of applause, people.